It's my nerd world. I am Jon Justice and a Star Wars podcast. These are words I didn't think I was going to say this week. We got a packed show. I'm like not kidding. All right, so before we get into what's on the show this week, just real quick, I hope to find you. I hope you're listening and you are healthy and you are safe. I'll continue what I said last week. We are going to get through this, and thankfully we've got Star Wars. Oh, and I'm so excited. I can't wait to tell you, but hold on a second. So, on the show this week, we're going to be continuing with the Rewatching series, and this week it is my favorite prequel film and one of my favorite Star Wars movies, Attack of the Clones. I know, shocking. I love this film. So, we've got production notes. We have a bunch of fun facts to share about the film, and also share some of my personal thoughts about the movie as well. We also have listener feedback, of course. Plus, a couple of the creators, the writers of Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, they did a sit-down and a rewatch of Rogue One and ended up basically doing a commentary about the film in the middle of when they were watching it. And I have a list of all the highlights from the Rogue One writers' commentary that I'll be sharing with you. We have some news items to get to. Daisy Ridley talking about the negativity towards The Rise of Skywalker, which is rather interesting. Rosario Dawson kind of confirming she's going to be playing Ahsoka in The Mandalorian Season 2. And the reason why I'm so excited is I just got done watching the latest episode of Clone Wars that dropped on Friday. Oh, it's so good. It is so good. Now, it might be because I'm just on an emotional, knife's edge because of everything that's going on in the world right now, but oh my gosh, I needed that fill of Star Wars. So, we'll kick off the show with that. I'm going to share a couple of thoughts. And spoiler-free for those that haven't seen the latest episode of the Clone Wars, the start of the last 4 episodes, the last 4-episode arc in Clone Wars as Season 7. So don't worry, I won't be spoiling anything. So let us not waste any more time and get to this week's packed show.
No, my father didn't fight in the wars. He was a navigator on a spice freighter.
That's what your uncle told you. He didn't hold with your father's ideals, thought he should have stayed here and not gotten involved.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
Yes. I was once a Jedi Knight, the same as your father.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
I am your host, Jon Justice, for My Nerd World this week and a Star Wars podcast, and I'm so glad that you were with the show. Let's just get right into it. I just got done watching the latest episode of The Clone Wars on the Disney Plus streaming app with my 13-year-old son, Kyle, and my 17-year-old, soon-to-be 18-year-old son, Logan. And we were all, we had a full consensus that was an incredible episode of the Clone Wars. I'd seen some chatter online. I avoided everything that I could since it dropped this morning going in. And thankfully, I'm blessed to be considered essential services in the middle of this pandemic. So I went in and did the radio show this morning, as I do every Monday through Friday. So I avoided most of the commentary. But man, the few comments that I saw about how great the show was did not even come close to doing it justice. That was an incredible episode. There were some moments in it that almost brought me to tears. I'm not going to, again, get into any spoilers. We'll spend some more time on this particular episode, maybe on next week's show, kind of do a 1 week behind to not spoil it for individuals that haven't seen it yet. But I will say, and I'm sure you know this already, this is not a spoiler, to see Ahsoka return to the core characters of Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. What Dave Filoni did with Ahsoka in this episode. The action was just absolutely incredible. There was emotional weight to the episode that I was not expecting. And this is the most excited that I have been for new Star Wars content since prior to the release of The Rise of Skywalker. I've really enjoyed the season so far. The Bad Batch arc was a lot of fun. The arc with Ahsoka and the sisters was a lot of fun. But I've mentioned on the show that I've really been wanting to get into some mythology and some deep storytelling, and some of the connections and the threads that are pulled on in this particular episode hit me right where I wanted to be hit when it comes to my Star Wars fandom. Just an absolutely incredible episode, and it has me yearning, clamoring for a live-action Ahsoka TV show. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that with this Entertainment Weekly story about Rosario Dawson. The only thing I want to mention about the episode, and again, I want to hear from you, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment on YouTube if you are listening to the podcast there. But my understanding is, so the Bad Batch arc, that had already been sort of storyboarded out, and some animation had been done on it prior to when they halted the production of the Clone Wars. I'm not sure how far into production they had gotten into, if they had gotten into it at all when it came to the 4-episode arc with the sisters. I believe there was some production done, because I know that one of the characters was originally supposed to be a male. Why do I bring all this up? I bring all this up because if you noticed, in this first episode of this last 4-episode arc of Season 7 of the Clone Wars, the animation's different. And it looks fantastic, but they definitely took a different approach when it comes to the animation. The action set pieces in this episode were incredible. It might have been one of the best Clone Wars episodes I've ever watched. It was just that good, in my opinion. My wife wasn't watching it. She was doing some other things. She's been busy around the house, mostly editing the 3rd book in my EMBARK series, which should be out here in just a couple weeks. But I went to her later. I'm like, you have got to watch this episode. But the animation was definitely different, and Ahsoka looked different as well. And I want to make a quick comment, and I could be completely off base here. I'm just going to say it out loud so I have it on in a show, just in case we end up getting details on this. But they changed the way Ahsoka's face looked a little bit. And it could just be circumstance, my head, my brain playing tricks on me, but I thought that I saw a little Rosario Dawson in the new sculpt of Ahsoka. I'm probably wrong. So before you at me, I'm probably wrong. By the way, you can follow me on Twitter at Jon Justice or at the My Nerd World. But Ahsoka definitely looks different, and I can't help but wonder if there were some choices made to perhaps make her look a little bit closer to Rosario Dawson. Again, I'm probably wrong. All right, speaking of which, Entertainment Weekly did put out a couple of Star Wars stories this week, and we have all the details for you as I try to go and grab the proper...
This is not going to go the way you think.
Segue clip. All right, so Entertainment Weekly put this article out. Rosario Dawson is kind of sort of confirming reports that she's playing a fan-favorite character in Season 2 of The Mandalorian. Dawson was asked by Variety magazine if she's playing Ahsoka Tano. That's not confirmed yet, but when that happens, I will be very happy, she replied. She then added, I'm very excited for that to be confirmed at some point, and it would be 1,001% because of the fans. So, the actress seems to be referring to the fact that Disney has refused to confirm Dawson's rumored casting. Normally, in such situations, it's because an actor's deal isn't finished, and therefore might not happen, but Season 2 of The Mandalorian wrapped filming in early March and is currently in post-production. Okay, with his team working remotely on the edit to maintain social distancing. So, presumably any scenes with Dawson have already been shot. While Disney's silence then might seem curious, remember, The Mandalorian didn't even reveal Baby Yoda, the child, until the season premiere aired last November. Ahsoka Tano is a popular character in the Clone Wars animated series, in case you didn't know. Voiced by Ashley Eckstein. Recently, Eckstein was likewise asked about Dawson being reportedly cast as Tano in the live-action series. And she wrote, the truth is, I'm not involved in The Mandalorian. I can't answer questions that I have not been a part of. I am an actress and have performed in all types of mediums, live action, television, film, theater, voiceover, hosting, and it has been my dream for 14 years to continue to play Ahsoka Tano in all forms. I will continue to be grateful for opportunities to help create stories for Ahsoka Tano, and I am always happy to see her legacy continued. I am only one member of a tremendously talented team of people that it takes to bring Ahsoka Tano to life. The final decisions for Ahsoka are not mine to make, and I cannot comment on something that I truly know nothing about. I know there was some fans out there that were frustrated that Ashley Eckstein wouldn't be, if it's true that Rosario Dawson is playing the character, wouldn't be playing the live-action version. I, for one, understand it. You know, content creators need to make what they determine are the best choices for any project. And I can certainly see why you would want to go with a well-seasoned actress for such an important role to bring it to a live-action franchise. I have no way of knowing of whether or not Ashley Eckstein would have been a good live-action Ahsoka, but I do know that Rosario Dawson is a very talented actress, and I'm incredibly excited to see her play that character. And again, after watching that Clone Wars episode, oh my gosh, bring it to me now. There were some moments that I just had I was almost in tears a couple of times. There were some moments that my mouth was just like, oh, it was so good. All right, Entertainment Weekly also put out this article, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a warning, okay? This might get a little touchy. I'll try to be nice. Oh, I don't mean it like that. No, I'm going to express my opinion on a couple of things, but I will always be respectful as I try to be. All right, so Daisy Ridley broke down her reaction to the Rise of Skywalker critics during a new interview that touched on the Star Wars franchise backlash. The Rey actress spoke to the Dragcast podcast about her feelings when the final Skywalker film was dragged online by many fans and reviewers after its December 18th release. It's changed film by film, honestly, Daisy Ridley said, like 98%. It's so amazing. This last film, it was tricky. January was not that nice. It was weird. I felt like all this love that we'd sort of been shown the first time around, and I was like, where's the love gone? I watched the documentary, The Making of the Skywalker Legacy, this week. Ridley continued, referencing the documentary on the Blu-ray release. And it's so filled with love. And I think it's that tricky thing of when you're part of something that is so filled with love, and then people don't like it. You know, everyone's entitled to not like something, but it feels like it changed slightly. But I think in general, that's because social media and what have you. She's 100% right. The actress also noted that if she didn't like the film, she wouldn't tweet about it, as is the case for most who work in the entertainment industry. I guess now conversations are just more public, so there's stuff I wouldn't have seen. But honestly, trying to scroll through my news feed in January and trying not to see Star Wars stuff, I'd see headlines and be like, oh my gosh, this is so upsetting. So it's been tricky. But then it's having that thing of I feel really proud of, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it. Look, this is where it gets touchy. So let me say up front, okay? Let me put this out there, and please listen to what I'm saying. Okay, everybody is entitled to your opinion, and your opinion may very much different than mine, and that is okay. But I am going to express my opinion, okay? The Star Wars fandom makes me sad. Not completely, but it makes me, that portion of the fandom that makes a decision to put so much ownership on particular characters or particular ships, or what they, and ships as in relationships, or what they think should happen in a film, that it ruins the experience for not only themselves, and that's fine, but it ends up ruining the experience for so many other people. Daisy Ridley is 100% right. If it wasn't for social media and the ability for anybody to just spew out, let out, you know, their opinion at a drop of a hat, anonymously or publicly, you wouldn't be perceived as it is so often. I'm still surprised to see there's a person on Twitter like blah is rewriting episode 9, and they continue to pump out these tweets about how awful the film is. I can't relate to that. I haven't ever done that about any movie. Okay, wait, hold on. I take that back. I wrote one blog once on my radio show page when I was working in Tucson over how awful I thought Transformers Revenge of the Fallen was. And now that's a film that I watch and enjoy quite a bit with my son. Okay, so that's about the most negative that I've gotten about complaining about a film. But I certainly don't do that about a Star Wars film. Daisy Ridley's right. These individuals, and you don't have to like the film, but these individuals put their heart and soul into these movies. J.J. Abrams put their heart and soul into these movies. And because of the backlash over The Last Jedi, I'm trying to hold my words here. Okay, in my opinion, because of the ridiculous backlash over The Last Jedi. You're entitled to your opinion. If you don't like that movie, that's fine. And if you're not the kind of person that was out there putting out tweets and still putting out tweets and comments about the film, I'm not talking about you. But there's a group of people out there that, again, from a Luke Skywalker standpoint, decided to claim ownership of this character and decided that, this franchise was ruined because of Rian Johnson. And there was a lot of individuals that took heat over wanting to have, those individuals that shipped Reylo, and during the whole run up to The Last Jedi and then post The Last Jedi, those individuals took a whole bunch of heat from the individuals that hated The Last Jedi. And then subsequently, a big majority, a big portion, I don't know how big, if it's the majority or not, a big portion of those people that took all that heat from the individual that didn't like The Last Jedi suddenly went and became the very thing that was going after them in their reaction over what they didn't like in The Rise of Skywalker. It's got to be tough for an actress like that, man. She's 100% right. You watch that documentary, and they're so... you can just tell how much fun they're having. You can see it in the performances. So again, you're entitled to your opinion. But man, it's such a bummer. And for me and from my perspective, okay, this is just from my angle. I'm only talking about Jon Justice in my opinion. I absolutely love The Rise of Skywalker. I think that it is just an incredibly fun and an amazing Star Wars film. J.J. Abrams is an incredibly talented filmmaker. Is it everybody's cup of tea? No. Is the editing everybody's cup of tea? No. Any more than the humor or the pacing of The Last Jedi isn't everybody's cup of tea, right? It's never going to appeal to everybody. But what I love about The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi specifically, and The Rise of Skywalker specifically, is that Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams, they were true and authentic to themselves. They made the movie that they wanted to make. J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio sat down and wrote this story and reworked the story. If you've read the art book, the Art of the Rise of Skywalker book, I mean, the movie went through just a lot of different, rewrites and a lot of changes and a lot of decisions that were being made. It was never going to appease everybody. But for me, it's a bummer to see an actress like Daisy Ridley, who, plays this character Rey, which is arguably currently my favorite Star Wars character, and especially my favorite Star Wars character in any film, being The Rise of Skywalker, who, you pour your heart and soul into this, and then you have a portion of the fandom that claimed so much ownership over these films that they do not own. That they put out into the world this barrage of ridiculous negativity, and that's a real big bummer in my opinion. And I hope that maybe on the backside of this pandemic and this pause in Star Wars and this pause in entertainment and Star Wars content, apart from The Mandalorian and Clone Wars, maybe we'll reach a point where, when we get back to that next Star Wars movie in 2022, the fandom will have changed a bit. Maybe we'll all have grown a little wiser, and maybe won't be so quick to take such total ownership of this franchise, and won't allow ourselves to get offended. Because that's what happens. People just allow themselves to get offended. That's a choice that people make. All right. I said my piece. Let's get to more fun stuff.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
Rogue One writers Gary Whitta and Chris Weitz held a live Q&A live stream watching Rogue One, and this is what they had to say. Some key takeaways from that live Q&A live stream. All right, a definitive opening crawl for the film Rogue One was written. Multiple opening crawls were written during the process, but they were never released publicly. The first thing written was the opening scene, which was inspired by Inglourious Bastards. Interesting. Cassian's introduction scene was a Tony Gilroy edition. Tony Gilroy was the individual who came in and basically did some reshoots of the film added some stuff after Gareth Edwards did sort of his first pass on it. What I like about this Q&A is there's some details in here that I'm really happy to read that shows that Gareth Edwards did actually that is still the bulk of his movie. A lot of people have made claims that Tony Gilroy coming in and doing cleanup work on the film meant that they reworked so much of it that there isn't much of Gareth Edwards' stamp on the movie, and that just doesn't seem true based on the comments by Gary Whitta and Chris Weitz. The writing team were told to lose a planet due to budgetary reasons. Originally, they had the Rebel base on Dantooine before moving it to Yavin 4. I wish they would have had it on Dantooine. I think that would have been pretty rad. In an alternate script, Jyn discovers the Death Star, then begins uncovering its secrets. The character was similar to Jessica Chastain's in Zero Dark 30, a movie that I absolutely love. Kiri Hart, who was a part of the story group for a while, suggested involving Saw Gerrera in the film. Forrest Whitaker was the only actor the team wanted for Saw Gerrera. In Saw's hideout, some of his team are playing a wooden hollow chest. Notice that. The first version of Borg Gullet was a memory trader. Gullet finds traumatic memories delicious, and there was a space Hannibal Lecter scene where Jyn trades her traumatic childhood memories for information. Chris Weitz was annoyed that was left on the cutting room floor. Gareth Edwards was allowed to name just one planet in Rogue One, and that was Scarif. He called it that because his barista at Starbucks would wrongly call him that, and I love that. If you've listened to any of my my self-publishing podcasts that I've been doing, I talk quite a bit about how I come up with a lot of the names for the characters and also the ships as well. And so I like to see little pieces of information like that, very similar to sort of approach that I take when it comes to putting in little Easter eggs, even if they're Easter eggs that only you, the content creator, know about. They wanted to go in depth with the Guardians of the Whills, but it was deemed unfilmable due to the scale of ideas. The team wanted a Rebel Tusken Raider, but Pablo Hidalgo shot that down because he believes they'd never leave Tatooine. Originally, Edu was at the start of the film. The Death Star dish was being built on Edu, and this is where Jyn first learns of the super weapon. Other titles that were considered for Rogue One were Dark Times, a Star Wars story, Rebellion, a Star Wars story, and Shadow of the Death Star. You know, it's easy to say Rogue One works better than all of those, but you never know until they use one of those, right? Because we're just so used to hearing Rogue One. I don't think Dark Times would have worked, but I think Rebellion would have worked. Shadow of the Death Star I don't particularly care for. But again, if we had a list and it was called Shadow of the Death Star and they had Rogue One, a Star Wars story, I don't know if I feel any different. Whitta included the Vader Bacta tank scene as he was curious what Vader did on his days off. That makes me laugh. Princess Leia was considered to be a more prominent character in the film. The writers considered having her in the war room scenes, especially in the scene where they debate taking the fight to Scarif, but ultimately decide that showing her at the end of the film and letting Jyn give a speech at the war room was more impactful. Gareth Edwards and Gary Whitta originally had the idea to have all the heroes die, but didn't think Disney would go for it, so they instead decided to let them all live other than K2SO, which they believed was an inferior ending. K2SO originally died on the beach in a blaze of glory. Tony Gilroy and Chris Weitz, then rewriting the film, decided all the characters had to die, and Lucasfilm loved the idea. The squad arriving on Scarif, splitting up, getting Imperial uniforms, and that stuff was all in the original version. And that makes me really happy. I don't know what it is, but I like to hear the stories about the productions that kind of push back against some of the rumors that we heard or perceived narratives that were out there, right? So many of the perceived narratives were that this movie was just completely reshot and redone and blah, 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 blah. And we said the same thing with Solo. So, I don't know. It's just nice to see certain parts of the film were actually that way from the beginning, right? And I can't really even explain why that is. They wanted to add Wedge into Rogue One, but because of his line in A New Hope, they couldn't, as it's clear he was seeing the Death Star for the first time. Look at the size of that thing, right? The team wanted to use Admiral Akbar in the Battle of Scarif, but Gareth didn't want to overuse legacy characters and instead created Radis. Stardust was a Tony Gilroy addition. Interesting thing about Stardust, George Lucas has said in previous interviews that you have to mention something 3 times in a film if you want it to sink into the audience. And I'm fairly certain that the Stardust line happens just that way. So you get the beginning of the film where Galen Erso calls Jyn Stardust. You get the middle of the film when she sees the hologram where you hear the Stardust line. And then at the end of the film when she's going through the list of the files on Scarif and she says Stardust, and she knows that that's in reference to her. The original version of the movie always had Jyn and Cassian climbing up to get the files. Originally, Jyn said, "I've got a good feeling about this" on their trip to Scarif. That was cut. And I've got a bad feeling of this line that was cut short in the movie, right? By K2SO said it, and they cut it short. Was added in reshoots. Jyn coming face-to-face with the TIE fighter that was in the trailer was never intended to be in the film. It was specifically a trailer moment. And I saw somebody make a comment about this on Twitter, because that's where I got this from. I'm sorry, on Reddit. And I agree. I wish they wouldn't do that. I do not like that. And I know that if you go back and watch those original Rogue One trailers, there's very little of what actually was in the movie in those trailers. But I do not like this idea that we're shooting, and it happened twice, and we'll talk about the next one here in a second. But I do not like this idea of the studios going and shooting scenes to put just in the trailer that aren't going to be in the movie just to show the essence of the film. No, man, if it's a trailer, then you should be showing me footage from the film, not stuff I'm not going to see in the film. The shot of Jyn in the tunnel wearing an Imperial uniform was just shot on the day. It was never intended to be, it was never in the film or intended to be. It was a shot simply because Gareth thought it was cool. Again, same thing. Originally, there were 2 main facilities, the vault where Jyn gets the files and the communications tower, which was separate by a large stretch of the beach. You can see Jyn running there in the earlier trailers. Gilroy later decided there was too much going on and it was simpler to just have those buildings be one building. In the early versions of the script, Jyn and Cassian clearly showed romantic feeling towards one another, but it lessened over time until it's basically no longer there. Vader was always planned to be in the movie, but it was the question of how much. The infamous Vader scene was added extremely late after it was suggested by an editor to Gareth, who went and then shot it. That makes me happy that Gareth Edwards shot that too. Early on, it was pitched that once Jyn reaches the communications tower, the rebels block it off and the Empire are unable to stop it, so Vader rushes to the beach where he mows down rebels on the beach and through the communications tower. So that was basically all the major takeaways from that Q&A with Gary Whitta and Chris Weitz. And look, I'll be honest, it's really interesting sort of backstory behind the scenes information, but I kind of agree with all the changes that are made. That also falls into the category of we have a film that we can look at, whereas we don't have a film with those other changes that we can, apart from the shots in the trailer. So who knows if I feel differently if they had gone the other way with it. But I really like Rogue One. I'm not as over the top over Rogue One as a lot of fans are. I know there's a lot of fans out there that consider Rogue One to be the best Star Wars film of the Disney era. I'm not going to go so far to say that. I think Solo and Rogue One are amazing films, but they stand on their own apart from the saga films. And I will always sort of automatically default to the saga films, saying if I had to give away some other movies, even though I very much love Rogue One. And there was a level of Rogue One that I took as inspiration when I was writing my stories. And when I go watch Rogue One, that's kind of what I get into when I think about my EMBARK books and the characters in that book and the group of them going off to go on these missions. I love that film for that reason. But it doesn't have that core mythology that runs through it, right? And neither does Solo, like the saga films do. And that's the part of Star Wars that I sort of lean into the most. So again, what do you think? TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. You can also leave a comment on YouTube as well, and we can read your comments back on next week's show.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
All right, welcome to Rewatching here on My Nerd World, the Star Wars podcast. I had made a decision before going into last week's show that I would move through all the movies in chronological order and share some details, fun facts, and my thoughts on the films, especially since we don't have any content right now. I never expected that we were going to get so much information this week to talk about, so I do have quite a bit to get into with Attack of the Clones, and we'll move through a lot of this quickly. I will say that I really do, as I've said, I really do love this film. It's got its flaws, there's no doubt about that, but there is a lot to love in this movie. And honestly, I think it may be one of the most underrated Star Wars saga films. It must have been an interesting time for George Lucas, having come off The Phantom Menace and sort of a lukewarm response to that. And we'll get into some of the production notes before we get into the fun facts of the film. But I guess the one question I would ask is it one of the most underrated Star Wars saga films? Look, it has so much going for it, right? That to me really... There's so much good in that movie that it really does overpower and outweigh the little bit of negativity in it. Okay, so let's start here. The lead up to the film. It was clear by this point in time, a few years later, after the Phantom Menace, that the Phantom Menace was divisive. We didn't have Twitter back then. We didn't have social networking. The internet was still it's there, right? But certainly not what it is now. So you needed a couple of years for narratives to form within the public, and by that point in time, there was very much a very palpable split within the fandom of the reaction over the Phantom Menace. However, people started to get hyped over Attack of the Clones, and what's really interesting about it is that in its initial release, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I remember when Attack of the Clones came out, there was quite a bit of positive reception at the time. And it was viewed, at least from the circles that I ran in and the message boards that I read, it was viewed at the time as being a vastly superior film to The Phantom Menace. I even remember showing a bootleg copy to a buddy of mine who wasn't a big Star Wars fan, but he'd watched the movies. He did not like The Phantom Menace. And I showed him a bootleg copy at home because he didn't go to the theater to see it. And I remember him wrapping up, and he said he really enjoyed it. He didn't like necessarily the Anakin and Padme stuff, and we'll talk about that. But I remember him liking the film. But in the lead up to the movie, the trailer that came out, I remember it gave me goosebumps, and it is still one of the best teaser trailers that Star Wars has released, in my opinion. The Phantom Menace one had a lot of weight hanging on it and importance hanging on it, but to me, in terms of quality, the Attack of the Clones trailer was spot on. It had a very ominous tone, and the shots that they used of Padme and of Jango Fett. And of course, Jango Fett being featured so prominently, seeing the Mandalorian armor again, right? The hype was really building behind this movie, and the pre-promotion of the film was pretty spot on. The teaser poster of Anakin and Padme standing back to back, right? We're getting introduced to Hayden Christensen. So people are keeping an open mind about this particular character. A lot of people were very pleased to see the choice over Hayden Christensen, even though he would obviously, get quite a bit of criticism over his acting skills, which I put more on George Lucas and his directing than I do Hayden Christensen himself. The official poster is one of my favorite Star Wars posters. Very just classic Star Wars. Padme and Anakin being featured so prominently, Jango Fett and the droids and some of the battle scenes being on there as well. It is really a fantastic poster. And again, the reception was arguably solid at the time of the release of Attack of the Clones. I went to several different screenings. I remember I went to a preview screening in Los Angeles with my dad. We ended up doing a special radio station screening because I was working for a radio station in Riverside and San Bernardino at the time. And I had a full, and I haven't been able to find it. I have it somewhere. I created my own Jango Fett costume and was actually an honorary member of the 501st at one point in time. And for some reason, in the middle of many, many moves, I ended up losing the costume. That really bummed me out. But the release of the film was positive. I distinctly remember that. Why that's changed over the course of many years, I do not know. It suddenly now has become very much on the list of worst Star Wars films for a lot of fans. And I'd love to be able to kind of get into why that came to be. Why the Phantom Menace ended up becoming more revered as time went on, and Attack of the Clones ended up being less liked. If you have any thoughts on that, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or again, leave a comment on YouTube. So before we get into some of the production notes, I just want to add a couple of things that I really, really love about the film. The opening shot of the ships approaching Coruscant, it's a really, really cool shot. You get the ships from the Phantom Menace. You get a new Padme cruiser. You get the two Naboo starfighters coming in and doing the flip to right the ships so that they land correctly as they head down to the surface. I just really, really love that opening that opening shot. The movie has less Jar Jar. Jar Jar didn't bother me that much, but I thought that it was the right move to include less Jar Jar. The speeder bike chase through Coruscant is an incredible set piece and action sequence. The whole film noir vibe of the film, and Obi-Wan Kenobi going on this fact-finding mission. The inclusion of Jango Fett at the start of the film with Zam Wesell. The design of Zam Wesell's outfit is absolutely incredible. And the whole arc with Obi-Wan, to me, is spot on. There's some moments on Kamino that I'm kind of, when you get to the Kaminoans and you've got this bright white sort of medical clean look and some of the washing the washing out of the bright walls when it comes to the CGI work that was done and the green screen work that was done isn't the best. It doesn't bother me that much in the film, but there's just some moments that are washed out. And again, I'm doing nitpicks here for the most part. Yes, the Anakin and Padme dialogue is wonky. Okay, I'll admit that. But, if you have teenage boys, if you've heard teenage boys talk to young girls, that is also very wonky. And I went into this last week on the show. What you had with George Lucas doing the prequel trilogy was George Lucas going back into his mind of being a kid and how teenage boys talked. George Lucas has also said that these movies in the prequels were very much designed with a 30s and 40s type of dialogue, right? He went into doing the original trilogy with more of a Flash Gordon Saturday morning serial vibe to it, which worked really well in the 70s. I think part of the reason why the prequels get so much criticism is because George tried to do something different. He tried to harken back to a dialogue that was more aligned with the 40s, and the audience just didn't buy into it, and that was certainly clear with some of the dialogue that Attack of the Clones has. But let's be honest, man, there's some quotables from Attack of the Clones. Anakin doesn't like sand; it's coarse and rough, and it gets everywhere. I mean, come on, it's classic for that. All right, one more quick point. Actually, two more. Dooku. Count Dooku is just awesome in the movie, right? That character's great, and I'm fine with what happens to him in Revenge of the Sith, but he really is a really different, unique take on a Sith Lord, and I really like that in the movie. The political intrigue of the film is really, really interesting, and it's epic. It's one of the things that I really love about Attack of the Clones, is that it is just such a... I mean, Revenge of the Sith takes it to the next level, obviously, but you don't get there without going through Attack of the Clones, and Attack of the Clones just has this huge, epic feel to it. that I absolutely love. I mean, when you say space opera Star Wars to me, Attack of the Clones is probably the most space opera-y in my opinion. And again, art's subjective, just in my opinion. All right, and the last thing that I want to get into before we get into some of the production notes and then fun facts about Attack of the Clones, the last 45 minutes of the film are incredible. Arguably, from the moment, my opinion, from the moment that the Republic gunships show up in the arena on Geonosis until the end of the film, might be, from that moment to the end, the greatest ending to any Star Wars movie. Top to bottom. Okay, I'm talking full circle, right? And I can get into this. I won't, but I'm talking full circle. The only other movie that I think might give it a run for its money is the ending of Revenge of the Sith. And these are things, like, if I'm looking for things that I could pick out. Because if you do like the end of A New Hope has the best space battle at the end, but it's just one battle. Okay. The Empire Strikes Back, great finish to a film, but it's very personal, not very big in scope, right? Ending on a cliffhanger. The end of Return of the Jedi, space battle's great. The throne room stuff's great. Endor, I can take it or leave it. When we're talking about the original trilogy, I won't get into the sequel trilogy. But of the first two trilogies, right? The end of that movie, it's hands down the greatest ground battle. If you told me I could only watch one ground battle from any Star Wars film for the rest of my life, what would I choose? I would even pick it over The Empire Strikes Back. And I like the ending of Attack of the Clones too, and especially, I like the ending of The Last Jedi because there's a lot of mirror going on with what happens in Attack of the Clones. When you look at that ground battle that takes place with the walkers, just the nature of the fight between the First Order and the Resistance in The Last Jedi, and then the inclusion of that standoff between Luke and Kylo Ren. There's just a lot of mirroring in my opinion of the end of Attack of the Clones. I mean, you could say that about the ending of a couple of different movies, but especially with Attack of the Clones. But I just, that is pure, just fantastic, exciting Star Wars. The gunships show up, the ground battle takes place, the chasing of Dooku, the gunships and the Geonosian fighters that knock Padme out of the ship before they arrive at the hangar where Anakin and Obi-Wan have to, duke it out with Dooku. Look what I did there. And then Yoda showing up, which they absolutely nailed, right? Just fantastic. All right, production fun facts. After the mixed critical response from Wikipedia, after the mixed critical response to the Phantom Menace, Lucas was hesitant to return to the writing desk. In March of 2000, just 3 months before the start of principal photography, Lucas finally completed his rough draft for Episode 2. Lucas continued to iterate on his rough draft, producing a proper first and second draft. For help with the third draft, which would later become the shooting script, Lucas brought in Jonathan Hales, who had written several episodes of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles for him, but had limited experience writing theatrical films. The final script was completed just 1 week before the start of principal photography. As an in-joke, the film's working title was Jar Jar's Great Adventure. In writing The Empire Strikes Back, Lucas had initially decided that Lando Calrissian was a clone and came from a planet of clones, which caused the Clone Wars mention by Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope that I played at the start of the show this week. So let me go through that again. Lucas had initially decided that Lando was a clone that came from a planet of clones. And that's why the Clone Wars was mentioned by Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope. He later came up with an alternate concept of an army of clone shock troopers from a remote planet, which were used by the Republic as an army in the war that followed. Principal photography occurred between June 26, 2000 and June 20th, 2000 at Fox Studios Australia in Sydney. A lot of location shooting, San Diego, Vancouver, London, China, Tunisian desert, Lake Como, right? Palace of Caserta, talked about that last week. At his own personal request, Samuel L. Jackson's character, Mace Windu, received a lightsaber that emits a purple glow, as opposed to the traditional blue and green for good guys and red for bad guys. Reshoots were performed in 2001. A new action sequence was developed featuring the droid factory after Lucas decided that the film lacked a quick enough pace in the corresponding time frame. The sequence pre-visualization was rushed, and the live-action footage was shot within just 4.5 hours. Because of Lucas's method of creating shots through various departments and sources that are sometimes miles apart from each other, Attack of the Clones became the first film to ever be produced through what Rick McCallum said was virtual filmmaking. I'm going to argue that Attack of the Clones would actually be a better film if they didn't have the droid factory sequence. I think that if you had... I know I like the droid factory sequence, but I certainly don't need it. And you can definitely tell in the CGI work that it was a little rushed. There's some really cool moments in the scene. The scene where Anakin uses the Force to throw some arms that are on a rack that are moving and throw them against some of the Geonosians was pretty rad. The inclusion of Jango at the end when they're captured is pretty cool. But I would be interested to see a cut of the movie where Anakin and Padme show up and they're immediately taken into custody, and then we immediately end up at the arena with Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think that there's a shortening of, because it's a long movie. I think there's a shortening of the film that would actually have done some credit for it, or would have done it some good. I choose my words there correctly. Holy cow! It's like I've been talking 45 minutes straight without a break. Lucas has noted that Palpatine's rise to power is very similar to that of Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany. As Chancellor of Germany, the latter was granted emergency powers, as is Padme. Comparisons have been made to Octavian, who became Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, and to Napoleon Bonaparte, who rose to power in France between 1796 and 1799. Octavian was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of political opponents before he was granted tribunician powers. Bonaparte was appointed first consul for life and later emperor by the French consulate after a failed attempt on his life and a subsequent coup back in 1799. Let's see here. References to the American Civil War can also be discerned. War journalism, combat films, and footage from World War II combat influenced the documentary-style camera work in the Battle of Geonosis. Again, just love that battle so much. Even to the point that handheld shakes were digitally added to the computer-generated sequences. Attack of the Clones was released on DVD and VHS November 12th, 2002. And I remember I was living in Corona, California at the time, and I went to a Toys R Us in Riverside to pick up my DVD copy of Attack of the Clones, and I was so excited to get the movie in my hands because I loved the movie. I loved the movie that much. I remember at the time I was so, and I can still remember getting in the car and tearing it open and looking at the DVD box. The DVD features an audio commentary from director George Lucas and producer Rick McCallum, also sound designer Ben Burt, Rob Coleman, ILM animation director, and some other individuals. John Kroll is in there, Ben Snow is in there. 8 deleted scenes are included, along with multiple documentaries, which include the full-length documentary about the creation of digital characters, and 2 others that focus on sound design and the animatics team. The on-review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes has an approval rating of 65% based on 253 reviews, with an average rating of 6.59 out of 10. The site's critical consensus reads this: Star Wars Attack of the Clones, Episode 2, benefits from an increased emphasis on thrilling action, although they're once again undercut by the ponderous plot points and underdeveloped characters. On Metacritic, the film holds a score of 54 out of 100 based on 39 critics. With mixed or average reviews, audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of an A- to an A+ to F scale, 62%. For what it's worth. I don't care, I love the movie. All right, fun facts about Attack of the Clones. I got a little programming note, by the way. I had intended to include stuff in the show, like a trailer, which I actually did last week. If you were if you were quick enough to have downloaded last week's episode on the rewatch of The Phantom Menace, you probably don't know this, but if you weren't, then you did notice this. I had included a trailer in the audio of the show last week, and then YouTube went and dinged me for a cease and desist, so I had to go back in and re-edit the podcast. So I don't know what's going on right now. I mean, I like to be able to take advantage of the monetary value of the content that I put out there, but unfortunately, YouTube right now is being really hardcore when it comes to cease and desist. So even throwing in an incredibly ancillary trailer for a movie that came out over 10 years ago. Yeah. All right. Fun facts about Attack of the Clones. Samuel L. Jackson has the words "bad mother effer" engraved on the hilt of his lightsaber. Cool. This is silly, unnecessary. Whatever. I know why it's there, because of Pulp Fiction. Don't get me wrong. According to George Lucas, Obi-Wan's hiding on Geonosis' asteroid field. In Geonosis' asteroid field, teaches young Boba Fett a lesson that he uses to his advantage during his adulthood. Having learned how to hide from him with his father, Boba Fett knows the trick Han Solo is using to hide in Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. Just before Anakin goes on a search for his mother on Tatooine, he has a conversation with Senator Amidala. The camera pans to their shadows as they talk. Anakin resembles that of Darth Vader because of the ponytail on the back of his head. According to the DVD documentary, the Vader-like shadow that Anakin cast was not a special effect, but just a happy coincidence. When Jango Fett gets into his ship after his fight with Obi-Wan on Kamino, he bangs his head partially on the open door. That was intentional and is a reference to the famous goof, for those that haven't seen it, in A New Hope, where a stormtrooper accidentally bangs his head on the door of the Death Star, and you can see his helmet almost fall off, and he walks into the room with his helmet falling off his head. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Senator Amidala is the best shot. She almost never misses. This is a reference to her daughter Leia, who also almost never misses. According to Star Wars canon, the Tusken Raiders who kidnapped Shmi Skywalker were paid to do so by Count Dooku. Dooku had done this on orders from his master, Darth Sidious. There is no mystical significance in color of Mace Windu's lightsaber. I don't know if that's changed in canon yet. Okay. Again, this was because there was a conversation Samuel L. Jackson had where purple was his favorite color. He wanted a purple saber, and George Lucas agreed to give it to him. During rehearsals, the filming of Count Dooku's lightsaber battle scenes, a small model of Yoda was used as a reference point for Christopher Lee. The model was slightly altered to have vampire fangs, to which Lee amused response was, "I will not comment on that. I didn't think you would do this to me, George." The fangs were likely a joke at Lee's expense for his performance as Count Dracula in the 1958 Dracula and several other Hammer Studio films. The Senate votes to give Supreme Chancellor sweeping powers to go to war against the separatist forces. As we mentioned earlier, this was the same ploy that Hitler used to gain dictatorial power in the mid-1930s Germany. Like Ewan McGregor did in Episode 1, Hayden Christensen made lightsaber noises the first time he was handed one in rehearsal. George informed him that they probably had people in the sound effects who could do a better job in post-production. Hayden Christensen became the only actor in any Star Wars movie who didn't get to choose the design of his lightsaber. It had been a tradition, but Christensen was stuck using a saber of the same design, but not exactly the same, that Obi-Wan gives Luke in Star Wars: A New Hope. A number of subtle visual clues were incorporated into the design of shots to help audiences keep track of who is who. The good guys, the Republic clone troopers, always moved from screen right to left, while the Separatist battle droids moved from screen right. The sun is behind the clones, resulting in a gloomier sky behind the Separatists. Finally, the missile contrails were color-coded to denote allegiance. The Republic rockets have clean white trails, while the villains' launch missiles have a noxious black-purplish exhaust. The fight between Yoda and Dooku was envisioned differently. Originally, Yoda was going to come in and immediately start fighting Dooku. However, it decided that the audience needed to feel the power of good and evil against each other, and George added in the preamble to the fight with the blue lightning and the rock falls, because it showed how powerful Yoda was. The lightsaber battle was a culmination of all that energy. And there was also a footage shot of Dooku using either Obi-Wan or Anakin's lightsaber in addition to his own against Yoda, but that did not make it into the final cut. This is the only Star Wars movie where the camera shot tilts up after the opening crawl to start the scene. In all other movies, the camera shot tilts down after the crawl. The Jedi archives were modeled on the Trinity College Library in Dublin, Ireland. When Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin enter the sports bar in Coruscant to search for assassin Zam Wesell, several actors are in the scene. Ahmed Best, Anthony Daniels, also R2-D2 handler Don Beese, and his droid team are there too. It's the first Star Wars film in which Yoda was entirely computer-generated. Dex's backstory was that he was a former mercenary and explorer, and he and Obi-Wan had served together on a couple of missions. According to the animation director Rob Coleman, not a single clone trooper suit was ever built. Every clone trooper seen in the film was computer-generated. The character Aayla Secura, played by Amy Allen, was not created by George Lucas. Aayla Secura first appeared in the 19th issue of the Dark Horse Comics Star Wars Republic series, Part 1, Star Wars Twilight. Lucas was so impressed with the character that he decided to have her in the film. Let's see. After making this film, Ewan McGregor appeared in Black Hawk Down, which required him to be clean-shaven and to have an extremely close buzz cut. New scenes with Obi-Wan Kenobi were added to the film in post-production. Since McGregor had not yet had enough time to regrow his hair or full beard, he had to be retrofitted with a hairpiece and a prosthetic beard, which is often easily distinguished from his natural hair as it appears in the film. These scenes include the conversation, and you can tell, between Anakin and Obi-Wan in the elevator at the start of the movie, the exchange concerning the changeling in the Outsider Club, and the Jedi Temple walk between Obi-Wan, Mace, and Yoda, and his interrogation by Count Dooku. The death sticks that the Pusher tries to sell Obi-Wan were a hallucinogenic drug, and their name is an obvious reference to cigarettes. According to Lucas, much like cigarettes, with each dose, the user's life was shortened. With successive dosages, took away larger chunks of their lifespan. And with each successive dose, the desire for a harder reaction increased. Lucas inserted this personally into the film because of his strict views concerning smoking. That character, by the way, was also the character Mouse in the original Matrix. To efficiently deliver a realistic explosion for the gunships that get shot out of the sky, ILM built a mandrill of the vessel. A mandrill is an all-blue practical miniature. It was rigged with prosthetics to blow up. The properly shaped explosion was digitally extracted, interacting with the properly shaped wreckage. The digital artist replaced the blue gunship with a computer-generated one. And there you go. There's fun facts about Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment on YouTube.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
And we'll wrap up the show this week with listener feedback. Anne Fasuvi. It's been far too long, Anne Fasuvi, since I've heard from you. But thank you for writing this week. I appreciate it. Thanks, John. I'm sure that Jamie Stanggroom and Ahmed Best would love that you referenced their recent interview. You're welcome, Aunt Fasuvi, and thank you for that from last week's show. Friend of the show, Jen G. I feel bad for Rosario already, and we haven't even seen her yet, but the character is already established, so the fandom menace is going to come in with the way they think she should be, and yada yada. She never comes back to social media again. The Phantom Menace I enjoyed fairly well. I mean, obviously the best part is the Darth Maul Obi-Wan Qui-Gon battle at the end with Duel of the Fates playing, just awesome. Worst for me, sorry it's not Jar Jar, was actually the pod race. It was too long and felt disjointed from the rest of the movie. I saw the Phantom Menace in the theater. I was so excited and didn't hate it. Nice podcast, John. I really appreciate the digging into the info for this film. You know, it's really interesting. I didn't realize the pod race was so divisive for people. I love the pod race, but I love racing. I got a buddy of mine who's a Star Wars fan, casual, but Star Wars fan. Kind of a roam. Oh, he's not going to listen to podcasts, but he enjoys watching all the movies over and over again. He doesn't like the pod race scene either. He doesn't like the announcers. That's his biggest beef. That's Drew's biggest beef. April writes this. John, I love your positivity. Keep it up. Thank you, April. I'll tell you what, I will. It's a deal. Hi, John. This comes from a friend of the show, a friend of mine, Ben Kent. I love the rewatch idea. My kids and I actually watched The Phantom Menace last week because of everything going on right now. We have a little extra time to build forts and watch Star Wars. I couldn't agree more with Ahmed Best about The Phantom Menace. My 6-year-old and 4-year-old were cracking up at almost everything Jar Jar was doing, and I realized how much that character actually works. I also wanted to put in my 2 cents about Holdo maneuver, lightspeed attack. Why it works. Why wouldn't it work? You point a ship at another ship, and you make it go really fast, and of course you do some damage if not completely destroy it. Why then wouldn't you do it all the time? I don't know. Maybe it's because it also destroys your ship and all the people inside of it. It's also visually one of the coolest things to happen in a movie. That's it. Thanks. Can't wait for Attack of the Clones. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to throw this out there real quick. If anybody's got an answer for me, okay? Because I do have, this is about The Last Jedi. Because he brought up the Holdo maneuver. So one, people have asked the question about the Holdo maneuver and why can't you use a droid? I haven't really seen that answered yet. Again, I don't let these things bother me, but they are are they unanswerable questions or are they just questions? So I don't know why that is. Okay, so that's one. You could use a droid and do that. 2, why did somebody have to stay behind on the ships that ran out of fuel in The Last Jedi? That's the part of it I would ask Rian Johnson that. I'm sure there's an explanation, and maybe I haven't found it somewhere, and maybe you've read it in some ancillary material, but I haven't even been able to come up with sort of as an author, like a version of why, right? So why? I mean, why did Admiral Holdo have to, if it's out of fuel, it's just going to fall back and they blow it up. Why do you have to stay behind and... Well, I mean, I know Holdo did because there was still some fuel left on the cruiser, but for the ones that ran out of fuel and then were just destroyed by the Supremacy, why did anybody have to be on it at all? That's the part of it I didn't get. Maybe you have an answer for me. All right. What else we got? We got one more here. A friend of the show, Miranda. I was 7 years old when The Phantom Menace came out. It was the very first Star Wars movie that I ever saw in theaters. I didn't understand the plot back then, but it was cool enough to keep me engaged and interested. I didn't know that there was discourse or fandom war going on, nor did I care. I was a kid, and none of that mattered to me. All I knew was that this was something that I never saw before, and it was just amazing beyond words. This is how you're supposed to feel watching a Star Wars film. Amen to that. You forget about what's going on in your own world around you, and you indulge in in an unbelievable, extraordinary, make-believe world right in front of you. But in a way, it does feel real because it's Star Wars magic. And I have to say, Dune looks quite fascinating. Yeah, it does. Oh, boy, the stuff on Dune looks great. They released some photos and stuff this week. I love Denis Villeneuve. I actually sat down and watched Arrival again this week. I hadn't seen it in a while, and that is an incredible science fiction film. Oh, so good. And Blade Runner 2049 is just absolutely epic. That's it for the show this week. I did it in just slightly over an hour. I thought it was going to take 2. But I also talked really fast, didn't I? But I got a lot of information out there. I think I'm going to watch Rise of Skywalker tonight. I started watching it this week, but I didn't get a chance to sit down and watch the whole thing because I like to watch the whole thing, and I just absolutely adored that movie. Hey, before I let you go, as I've mentioned, I am in the final weeks of the polishing up EMBARK, Book 3, The Vanishing War. All right? The war for peace has begun. I got a tagline for it and everything. So listen, and I'm going to do a quick plug for my books. If you are like so many people stuck at home and you're looking for something to read or listen to, there are 2 books in the opening science fiction space opera series that I have written. It's called EMBARK, Book 1, and EMBARK, A Treasure in Darkness. I wrote them because of my love of science fiction adventure films. I wrote them to be enjoyed by young and old. They are clean for kids, 11, 12-year-olds up. And older folks enjoy them as well. This is a great opportunity for you to pick up these stories before the release of Book 3, which will conclude the trilogy and the ongoing series of books. Book 3, The Vanishing War. I'm eyeing currently... Oh, man. I'm looking at the 24th on my calendar. I'm looking at today being the 17th. That's going to be probably a bit of a stretch. So probably the 29th. I'm thinking the 29th it will be available. So if you need something to read, either ebook or paperback or an audiobook, they are all available at Amazon.com. All you have to do is go to Amazon and search for EMBARK and Jon Justice. And so if you are, and I know for everybody that listens to the show, thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to take it's my show, but still, I want to appreciate it. If you're still listening, thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to promote my books. I don't do Patreon on this. And so, as I always say, if you want to support this podcast, purchase a copy of my book for you or a friend, and be sure to leave a positive review. If this is the first time you're listening to the show and you're like, I hear you talking about these books and they're science fiction and they're space operas, but what in the world are they about? For Earth, the end is near. Only a reluctant hero and the girl he loves have the power to save humanity's future. It's the not-so-distant future, and car culture is replaced by air and space flight, made possible by two of Earth's largest corporations. Flight mechanic Taft Guardia spends his free time racing through the skies with his three best friends and the girl he longs to be with, headstrong Keith Amaro. With the planet on the brink of an industrial apocalypse, a powerful and ruthless corporate madman, Sint Argum, moves to exploit the disaster with his covertly created military. When Taft, Keitha, and their friends uncover a shocking secret, Sint Argum will stop at nothing to find them. Time on Earth is running out, but with the help of a ragtag group of young pilots, they'll fight for humanity's future and survival among the stars. That story is the opening story for EMBARK. Don't want to give you too much about Treasure in Darkness because it would ruin EMBARK for you before you've read it. Go to Amazon.com, pick up a copy for yourself. If you've already purchased a copy for yourself, but you know somebody who is stuck at home, maybe would like something to read. It's got some romance in there. It's got some science fiction. It's got thrills. It's got spaceships. It's got the world coming to an end, but not because of a virus, but because of an industrial apocalypse and Yellowstone Park blowing up. My gosh, how much cooler can it get, right? When you have to evacuate Earth, the only place you can go is up. Go to Amazon.com, search for EMBARK, Jon Justice, and if you want to gift it to a friend, there's a little handy-dandy little link right there when you go to purchase, and you can say buy for a friend. You can get him the ebook. All right, that's it. I have more audiobook that I need to record for the Vanishing War, so I'm going to wrap this up. Just say, I hope you have a great week. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on the Clone Wars episode. Oh my gosh, it was so good. I'm going to go watch that first and then go watch The Rise of Skywalker. This is the best mood I've been in weeks. Can you tell? Seriously. Man, it's been rough. We're going to get through this, though. All right, that's it. Have yourself a fantastic week. Thank you so much for checking the show out. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did recording it. And I'll tell you what, let's do it again next week, shall we?
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.